Welcome everybody to today's webinar on achieving a successful ERP transformation with process modeling. It's brought to you by iGraphics and Cornerstones. I'm Don Hart. I'm going to be your host today. Before we get started, let's take care of a few items here. Everyone has been muted, but we encourage you to submit questions via the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Secondly, everyone that registered will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. With that, let's take a look at the agenda.
Thank you, Don. Take over. My name is Tore, and this is the agenda for today's webinar. We start by having a brief introduction to Cornerstones and graphics, Christian and myself, and then we'll look into why we see a benefit for working with process models for ERP transformations, and also then how we can actually support the maintenance of an ERP system by utilizing a process model. And finally, we'll look into a successful case where we have a process model that keeps creating value for the business here. The key takeaways from the webinar today is to discover how process models can maintain system permissions and ERP upgrades, and also how explore the link between the ERP development systems and process models and how this is how these relates. And then we also learn how to benefit post implementations from extensive effort putting into the ERP project here. So learning what can we actually utilize afterwards. But let's jump into it. My name is Mortensen. I'm a senior business consultant at Cornerstones. I've been working with the Cornerstones for 5 years as a project manager on ERP projects and also a process specialist. Before Cornerstones, I have been working as a business process manager for a production company with the responsibility of their process landscape and process model for 8 years. So working with processes for the last 13 years. Cornerstones is a company where we are helping other companies succeeding with bigger IT and ERP transformations. And Christian, would you introduce yourself?
Happy to do. Hi all, my name is Christian. May you know me from other webinars. I'm the director for solution consulting, helping customers to find the right solution or working very closely with Token Cornerstones to deliver together the value to the customer. And yeah, thanks for joining.
And then let's jump into it. So first off, why do we work with the process models when we're talking about the ERP transformations here? And the first thing that we see is that the ERP transformations are business projects and not the IT projects, and therefore it's of course essential that we understand the business and the processes that the business operates. And by doing that, we need to have a process model that creates one common language across the organization, because then we actually are able to understand the activities and the processes across the different areas and across the different functions. So sales will be able to understand the production and vice versa. And this is crucial to actually succeeding within the ERP projects and making sure that the solution is aligned across the entire organization here. What we see is that some projects suffer for not having a proper understanding of the processes within the projects, and there is sometimes misunderstandings and sometimes there are gaps because it's not clear what the processes are and how they're working. And by mapping out the process models and the processes within this, we can actually identify these gaps and clear out the misunderstandings quite early in the project and not suffer in the long run here. In Cornerstones, we see the processes as critical enablers for success and for successful project delivery across multiple areas within the project here. And looking into these ones, we actually see that by working with the processes and mapping out the processes throughout the ERP project, we're building up critical business knowledge that we can actually utilize later on in the project here. So for example, in the start of the project, we are building up a business model and a process model containing the full process landscape and how the the business is working today. And this knowledge is utilized to actually choosing the proper system in the first place and the proper partner, but also making the partner capable of understanding the business and how it operates really, really fast, and making therefore the selection phase more efficient, and actually making an accelerated process for working with the partners here. Afterwards, when we have selected a partner and also a system, of course, we can utilize and work upon the process information that we have built up here, and start to actually designing the future solution with the to-be processes, which again then will be utilized when we are developing and building up the system here. We utilize the to-be processes in the entire test phase, where we are basing our test cases upon the process documentation, and using the process diagrams as the description of the test cases. So reducing the time that needs to be spent on creating long texts and a lot of typing for the steps that is contained within these test cases here. Furthermore, of course, the process diagrams can also be utilized as the foundation for the training material, so we have a head start when actually need to build up the training material in the end of the ERP project. And even after the implementation, we can also utilize all the knowledge that has been built up for the continuous improvement, where we are looking into potentials both for process improvements, but also for automation and AI potentials, and start to actually work with the processes and the process model to build up a full pipeline here. So throughout the project, we are gaining this knowledge, and at the same time we are combining or relating the process model, in this case graphics, with the development management tool. And as an example, we are using Azure DevOps in some of the projects. Then we are actually combining the two tools and basing both of them, of course, on the process hierarchy and the process landscape, making sure that we are taking the technical information and technical documentation and linking that up to the process landscape and the processes, making sure that we are now talking about a business and not a technical solution. That enables us in regards to answering different questions, and that could be like, how are we seeing interdependencies between processes first off, but we can also use this information to actually identify what relevant variations and scenarios that exists within a process. So here we can see that we have different variants going through the diagram, and then start to analyze how many different procedure variances do we have within these different variances here. Further on, we can also go in and look at the areas and processes that we have in our landscape, which of these are involved in which end-to-end flows, and thereby we will be able to actually enrich the understanding across the organization and across the business, and what we are doing here is affecting what areas later on in the flow here. Other questions like which roles are supported by which systems can be answered here, supporting permission management and also license management. We can also look into which processes are supporting which systems, and thereby starting to get an overview of the system landscape at the same time as building up the process landscape. We can also look into where we have ERP customizations. So looking down into each of the processes and activities and saying, at this activity in this process, we have customized the ERP, and we can relate that customization to the tool like Azure DevOps. And then we can see what type of customization are we talking about here, which is really beneficial for us when we are moving into the test phase. So that is some of the information that we are building up during the ERP project, and some of the knowledge that we gain here. And when we are then having a finalized implementation and moving into the life after the ERP project, where we have an operating ERP system, then we have some possibilities to actually also gain value from the process model and all the work and information that we have gathered throughout the project. For example, we can start to look into the permission management, and we can look into what type of roles needs access for which type of systems. This is information that we have built throughout the project, so it's not additional information we need to add. It's simply just utilizing the knowledge we already have here. And then we look into our graphics. We pull out a report saying that these roles are doing these activities in these systems, and thereby we can start to actually look into what type of permissions do they need, and what type of licenses do they have. And the benefit here is that we can actually see that we can reduce license costs, and we can furthermore add an efficient governance setup around the permissions, meaning that we can ensure that the permissions is continuously maintained, and that we are not looking into having too broad of a license base here for the users. If we look into the system updates, many of the ERP projects that we are running are looking towards cloud solutions where we have continuous updates coming in every year. And here we can actually benefit from having knowledge about customizations and also the test cases based on our process variances. So we can look towards our process model, and we can look towards Azure DevOps and the link between here. And then we can pick the different information and say, we have these type of customizations, and they are placed in these processes and these activities, and thereby they are affecting these test cases. And then we can start to build up some test packages for each of the individual updates in the ERP, making sure that we are actually focusing on the right test cases, and thereby reducing the risk of system failures when we are doing the updates. And then we can make sure that we are not spending too much time on testing, but that we are testing the proper parts of the system to make sure that everything is running after the update here. We also look into continuous improvement in our projects when we are done with an ERP implementation, and that we actually through process workshops or brainstorm sessions, we are using process diagrams and process data from the process model, and thereby identifying potentials for actually improving, because many times we see that what we implement as phase one or as the first version of the ERP has potential of improvement, and then we actually can see where we should start focusing with the process model to make sure that we are improving we are taking the proper improvements first, and we can actually use our graphics and the process model within this to build up an improvement and automation pipeline, and then together with a management framework outside where we actually manage and drive the different improvement initiatives, we can see where have we already improved and automated, and then where is the next potential that we need to jump onto here. So utilizing the information that we build up during the ERP project after the implementation is something that some of the companies are sometimes missing, and can actually gain quite some benefits from, and get some value out of. And I will try to demonstrate now how it looks like, and what information that we are building up. So I will jump into our graphics and to show you some of the information and some of the data that we're building up here. So this is an example of a process model where we will have some of the processes documented in. And when we come into this, as you can see, we have made process diagrams with areas and roads, mapped out the activities, of course, but we have also added in the system support for each of the activities. In this case, it's some For some, it might look like random transaction codes, but actually this is SAP, the ERP system SAP, which is based on transaction codes. So that means that the function ME51N is handling activities related to create purchase requisitions here. And by mapping out the different systems onto the activities here, we are actually able to say which activities are performed in a system and what permissions should people have for these system activities. If we look into another process, here we are jumping into production and under prepare production, then you can again see that we have the different areas and the different roles. And here we are lacking some information because right now it just says SAP, and here we need to get to a deeper level so we can pull out a report saying that here we have some work to do to actually specify what needs to be done here. But as you can see, we have mapped out the process, and in this case we know that it's that this transaction code is needed for this one. What we have also done is that we have linked the different processes together. So clicking on the end event, we are navigated to the next process in the flow, which is execute production, and thereby we are creating the end-to-end understanding and saying what process is before this process and what is coming next. And at the same time, we also look into the process where in regards to the variations, as I spoke about before. And here you can see that we have 4 different paths. We have different variations within the process where we can actually say that if we are talking about production with frame assembly, this is the process to go. If we have production without frame assembly, it looks like this. If we are having a case where we are missing production papers, then this is the road. All these different paths here is creating the baseline for our process variations and thereby our test cases. And then when we are describing test cases, we can simply just make a screenshot or a link into these paths, and then we can add that to the test case and say this is the steps that you need to perform in case of this variation. All right. Jumping back to the process here, what we are looking for is not having the need to actually go in process by process and looking for each of the individual transactions that a person needs to execute, but instead we are running a report where we can actually say for each of the different processes we have different activities performed by different roles, supported by different types of systems here. And in this case, we are thereby able to say that if we have the production roles, that is a production operator and production specialist, then we can actually appoint the specific transaction codes for this role. And then we are able to say that this is the permissions that role needs here. And then we can start to look into what activities are actually performed by which systems. This is all SAP, but it can vary. So it can also be different systems that we're talking about. Furthermore, we can also go in and allocate to a specific activity, whether there is an ERP customization assigned to it. In this case, update quotation has been customized, and the customization is allocated to ID 115 in Asia DevOps. Thereby, we can actually see that there is a customization, and we need to be aware when we're testing, but we can also see specifically what type of customization we're talking about here. Furthermore, we can also add information in regards to process maturity and automation maturity, which gives us an indication of where we actually need to go in and improve the process, or in some cases actually go in and do the automation part. So this is some of the information that is being built up during and after an ERP project when we are working with these ones. And now I would like to jump over to one of the cases that we have and elaborating what type of value we have here. This case is a production company which is based in Denmark, but is operating across different countries in Europe. We have the company has 4,000 employees, whereof 2,500 was impacted by the ERP transformation. The 3 major entities out of 12 entities were involved in the ERP transformation, and the ERP project was replacing 4 different ERP systems into one common ERP system across the 3 entities here. During the project, we created a process model containing a process landscape with 400 to 500 processes. And this process model was maintained and managed by 1 full-time employee and 1 part-time employee, indicating that the way of working with iGraphics and the way we are working with iGraphics here is not that heavy resource-wise. It's actually, it doesn't require a lot of resources to do from the central BPM team. Of course, there is the process organization that needs to add information in regards to mapping out the processes, but maintaining the process model here itself is not that big of a job here. But what we achieved was creating a governance model behind all the data that we had in iGraphics, so we didn't have to scroll through all the process diagrams, but we could actually look at the data in reports and say, where do we need to work and where do we need to focus, and then we could provide this information to the process organization here. Furthermore, we utilized all the information, all the process diagrams, to actually show what we need to test and also what needs to be trained on for each of the different roles in the organization here. And it was a project consisting of several rollouts. So for each of the rollouts, we have built up test packages, and every time we had a new rollout, we could utilize this test package consisting of different test cases, and then we could say which ones are relevant for you. And if there was missing any test cases, we could build upon it, but we could save time in actually taking up the test cases from rollout to rollout here. We also managed to build up a pretty tight collaboration with the permission management, where the permission responsible, every time she got a request for new access in some of the systems, she was asking, where can I see that in the processes? And if it was not reflected in the processes, then it took 10 to 15 minutes to update the process together with the BPM team. And then they were allocating the permissions afterwards. That meant that we had continuously a process documentation that was continuously updated, because otherwise people couldn't get the proper access. But then we also saw that people were always having the proper access here. So that was working really well in this case. And over time, we developed from just being a business process management team to also being an automation team as well. So adding RPA, project process automation, onto it, using the knowledge that we had from our processes and the process diagrams to actually say, where should we automate? And then we afterwards indicated in the processes where we had some of the automations, and used this for maintaining the implemented robots here. So this was working really well, and we gained a lot of benefits within the company by building up this framework and this way of working here. And iGraphics was allowing a lot of this, and we also played around with a lot of other functionalities like simulation and process mining. And this is something that is great, and we could utilize a lot from that. But I think Christian will take over that part and elaborate a little bit more on the on some of the other functionalities that iGraphics also can provide here.
Thank you, Tuke. I'm happy to take over here. I think just to quickly, I was also impressed by, and as a quick wins like saving license cost, especially in SAP, that could be a quick return of invest if you really can see what persons need what kind of licenses, and that's the basic exercise to get this visibility, and it could be like mentioned a quick win. But yeah, I would like also quickly show, because you mentioned like process optimization and continuous improvement. I think you guys maybe hear that iGraphics involving and providing, and this is the name, Process 365, more capabilities really to drive optimizations, be quicker, saving costs and so on. And I would quickly like to share, just to give you an idea how it looks like. Let me see if I can take over. So perfect. So I mentioned quickly the technology process mining. So of course we are working in the process documentation with the knowledge how we expect that the process should run. But if we analyze really the log data, it sometimes looks much more chaotic or more variants are identified. And that's what iGraphics tool is doing automatically. So we connect to ERP systems like SAP, and then we can, by analyzing the logs, the events, what in the system happen, directly to show how the flow looks like. And of course, you would be able to create process models out of it, and even to say, okay, I want to focus on some specific variants, and then say, okay, that's my baseline for my process model. So I can do that and then extract the data and say, okay, that's my first discovery. But also from this point, you see here on the right side all these variants, and there could be quite many. Like before, you always can focus on the most common one, so you don't need to analyze every kind of exception. But I think important also, if you have the process model, you can always overlay your documentation. And what you also quickly see, everything what is green is like we documented, but there's additional steps happening in the system. What could be always a point, do we have something specific? Is there something happen we need to take in consideration for our standard model? Or is there a compliance break or something? We really can quickly compare the documentation with the real data to get 100% transparency, because this technology can just based on log data. So we need both technologies to really get the full transparency, but it can help me really quickly identify maybe some differences. But also if I go quickly on the inside of the informations, you see if I scroll down, we quickly can identify inefficiency, or that's also done by the system automatically. That's taking me, well, here we see the activity goes out and in. That means I do this step several times. And if I just click and say, okay, how often this step happens, so we see then it's loading, giving me more insights, and then I can see how big is the pain of this inefficiency, and then say, okay, I need to, yeah, it happens all the time, but let me switch it the other way. So let's go then in the filter and say, let me check how often this rework happens. And maybe you say it's fine if it's one time, but so we're focusing just on say more than 3 times. And then we see all like 20% of all cases need more than 3 reworks. And now you will say, well, we need to do something because that's not efficient. And then we can really maybe to analyze what's the problem. Is this really the workflow? Do we need RPA to automate that? Or is this a customer problem? Or it's a training issue we need to enable? And therefore we have also maybe to show another example. We implemented or will have the capability in mining to say so-called root cause analysis. Because you say, well, I'm not an expert, not an analyst, we don't have these teams, but iGraphics focused on business users, so the technology is helping you to get the answers automatically. So I can define my problem like, see, here I have quite often a price error. What's the reason? So I can view the problem and the system is analyzing and telling me what's impacting this price error and give me options. And you see on there's different areas, but also the operator ID is an issue like 10%, where it could be a training topic and so on. But yeah, like Toke said, that's additional technology could create additional value and so on. And of course, this data could be played back in your standard model. Toke was showing the different variants, how they run through. Of course, you can define them manually, but this can also transfer automatically for mining, that you see directly all your variants, how the system is or the process is executed. And just one last point, and then let's switch to the Q&A session. As soon we have the real data and the model, and I think that's really the beneficial to be, let's take this data and run a simulation in case of how does the process will run if we change that. So just quickly to show you something that there's something happening. But let's say here you see I starting my simulation, our current baseline. We know we have a bottleneck there in finance to check the credit. So I can stop that. Let's check out and do a change. So I go into resource management and would try, like companies always doing that. We have too much work. We just hiring people here in one department and then run the simulation again. And now I will see how does it really helps the process. And we see now, well, hey, great, it's working for finance. So the investment, what I'm doing is helping finance, but not the whole process, because now we see as soon finance runs better, we're creating another bottlenecks. And that's what we want to bring from iGraphics, really these data-driven insights to say, if I do changes, how does it impacting my process, to really find the best options and not run from one initiative from finance, then to going into the next optimization, because we cost something production and so on and so on. And that takes time. And that's also maybe a disadvantage. Of course, I optimizing that step by step, but maybe the competition is quicker and it could be an disadvantage. So we can really analyze it before I go in this investment. And like said, I did some simulations. You see here on the light side, I can quickly take over the variance and say, what I simulated here right now is my baseline. So we need this time. And now we say, okay, there could be an option for an update of or new CRM system to say we can make it better, or we implementing another solution, and I can easily quickly compare this up. Of course, it's an example, but you see now I would have in all my categories more improvements. It's a little bit quicker and it's cheaper. But just to give you an idea here, if you run the simulation, you're generating data so you can really build up the use case for your management and make ROI before you really start the project, so that we say, okay, it's worth it to work on and improve it. And even just to show another example, because my colleague is doing that, if I'm evaluating, and you see here, he did much more scenarios. And that's, I think, just to show you the possibilities. We can do more different scenarios. So we just hire in finance. So if we want to optimize the whole process, we need in all three areas. But then I also can do my planning for next year. All companies want to grow. So we started an investment, but how does will impacting if we want to grow next year by 30%? And we see here how it's working. As soon we have optimized that in the best way and want to grow by 30% next year, how does it impact my numbers and KPIs and so on? So I can really plan better and make a proper decision on data, what I'm generating. And that's what we're delivering as additional modules. So like Toke said, they started with customers, setting the scene, building up the baseline, all the informations, and then running as an additional exercise the continuous improvement. And I think that's what you guys like for my graphics. So you can grow with the customer. So it's not the big bang approach. The customer can involve and create additional value step by step. But just
For
to
sure.
give you here,
and that is also supporting the work with the ERP project in general, because then we can actually see that whenever we are taking the next step in the ERP, we also take an evaluation whether we actually could bring in some of this information to support the new activities coming into the ERP system here, so to the ERP project. So that is really relevant here for sure.
and like mentioned, yeah, it's an option, but like mentioned, it could be an accelerator. It could generate the insight. It could be maybe helping to be more successful. And yeah, but ask. We have here experts who doing a lot of ERP transformations. They really motivated to help you on your journey. But I think that's just from my side to round up that, yeah, we have the documentation, but also additional technologies. I would now maybe bring back Dawn. Is there any comments, questions from the participants?
We don't have any questions from the participants yet, but I encourage you to enter a question at the bottom at the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I do have a couple frequently asked questions. And this first one, probably everybody asks at some point, how do we get started? Where do we get started with such a project like this? You talked about 4,000 employees, 2,500 of them being affected, 4 different ERP systems. How do you get started?
That is a good question here, and to start with, we need to actually identify what is the ambition here. If the ambition is, as we have gone through, where we actually want to see to be able to see this information, we know that we need a tool like a graphics to jump into here. So we have taken the first step to say, okay, it's a graphics that needs to support us in these type of informations that we need. And then when we have decided this, we need to go out and engage with the process organization, because normally companies don't have these type of roles where we say we have process owners. So we need to have some ownership in the out in the business, in the organization, to make sure that it can live afterwards. And then it's just to start building up the business model, as we call it, the process landscape, saying what type of areas do we have, and then allocating the guys that we have been speaking with here as the process owners, and get them on board and start to mapping out the landscape. That's the first steps just to get rolling. As Christian says, this then evolves slowly over time, and then we can actually start to see that we have that we get the data in iGraphics, and then we can always build upon this in also in close collaboration with the iGraphics team as well here. So that would be how to get started for sure.
Yeah, I also found it kind of interesting that you talked about this is a business project, not an IT project. Given that, because now you have so many different entities or business units involved in this, how long does a typical ERP transformation project take?
It of course varies from depending on the business, the company size, but normally what we are looking into in the projects that we are operating here, we are talking about 1.5 to 2 years if we're talking about a mid-sized company. Some of them are taking much longer, but some we have also have minor projects that takes close to a year. But 1.5 and 2 years is what we typically look into here. And if we're not making the proper preparations, and also looking towards it as a business project and not an IT project, we risk looking into 3 or 4 years of implementation, because we need to backtrack sometimes.
And how big of a process organization do you need to have for something like this?
Yeah, well, typically we are talking about 10 to 15 process owners in a mid-sized company. And sometimes people have a smaller organization where they can cover it with 5 to 6 people, but 10 to 15 people would probably be covering the process ownership at least. And then of course there will be process specialists or super users under this, but the process owners are the important part to get in place in the first place at least. So that's around there.
Well, we don't have any other questions from the participants, so I'm going to thank you and Kristen for a very interesting webinar. And again, to remind the participants, as you registered, you'll be getting a follow-up email with a link to the recording, and appreciate your time and interest in this webinar.